So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending where you're joining us from. On behalf of the National Child Passenger Safety Board, thank you for joining us for the CEU webinar Hot Topics by CPS Stages. Today's speaker is Denise Donaldson from Safe Ride News. She's the owner and publisher, and I promise you'll get a little more information on her right there on this slide. My name is James Fitzpatrick. I am the Community Engagement Representative on the National Child Passenger Safety Board. We do have planned time to answer questions at the end of the presentation, so please enter your questions in the Q&A box. What we do not need you guys to enter in the Q&A box is your name or where you're from. Zoom does all the work for us on tracking who's here, so you will be awarded your time. You do have to stay on for a minimum of 45 minutes for the CEU. As a reminder, attendees are requested to not participate in this webinar if you are operating a motor vehicle. The webinar will be recorded and you can listen to the recording when you safely arrive at your destination. The recording will be posted to carseateducation.org within 1 to 2 business days, but knowing Kendra, usually much faster. For the CPS technicians or instructors in attendance, the presentation qualifies for 1 CEU credit. Attendance on this webinar is required for at least 45 minutes for the CEU credit. Proof of attendance will be emailed 24 hours after the webinar. When entering the CEU into your Safe Kids profile, this is a webinar/teleconference and all required information will be found on the proof of attendance. So please join me, in welcoming Denise. Thank you, Denise.
You bet. Thank you. And thank you to the CPS board for inviting me to do this webinar. There's a lot of hot topics I'm excited to be able to bring to this webinar. And so just a great chance to be able to share this with people. I like to organize things. So I kind of took a bunch of the things that I feel are important for CPSTs to be learning about and put them into order by stages. So we'll talk about touching front seat backs, using load legs, tethering in pickup trucks, some changes about that, rigid latch and seatbelt use simultaneously, and then some information about booster seats. And then if you stick with me to the end, there will be some information about the upcoming latch manual. So you will definitely get your 45 minutes plus of CEU material and then a little reveal at the end. So jumping right in, talking about rear facing and seat back interaction. Probably you've been hearing a little bit about that lately. And so I just want to kind of clear that up a bit and actually have a lot of material on that. So just to start with, of course, we know why rear facing is better than forward facing for young children and the way their spine would react to the forces of a crash rear facing. And you can see in this sled test scenario how that works. However, sled test scenarios don't include all the other parts around the car seat in a vehicle. And so there's the lab, and then there's what we actually do in the cars. And so there's always been the concept of whether or not the car seat can touch the seat ahead. Typically, it's the front seat. Usually we're in the second row. And over time, I've definitely heard a lot of CPSTs say it can't touch the seat ahead. And that may be because for many, many years, Evenflo has actually stated in their manuals that you need to keep 1.5 inches gap between the back of their rear facing only seats in an outboard seat and the front seat. And so here's an example from their popular Light Max, Safe Max owners manuals that's describing that if it's behind a front seat, you want to keep that 1.5 inches of space, which would look like this image. So why is that? For a lot of years, we didn't really know necessarily why, but lately they've been communicating more with us. And there's an Evenflo blog post from Sarah Haberstick that says that they want to keep that 1.5 inches of space so that it provides enough clearance in a serious rear impact crash in case the front seat back deforms. So that's a concept where, this photograph that I have here is a post-crash kind of car. And if I were with you in person, I would be showing, if you can see my hands, if you're hit from the back, and remember, everybody moves toward the point of impact. So that front seat driver or passenger is going to press into the seat back, and your rear facing car seat will also move toward the back. And so what we want is not to have, in case that back seat deforms, in other words, the pressure of that front seat person making that back seat go down, we don't want it to catch the back of the car seat. We want enough gap so that that movement occurs with clearance for that to occur. And so that is instructions from Evenflow, has been in their manuals for years, and continues to be today. So remember though, this applies to their rear facing only models, those that are shorter, lower down. It only applies in the outboard positions. In other words, where there is a seat right in front, not between the two front seats, and in the second row, because the concern for that deforming is for a front row seat. And so there's actually in their FAQs a FAQ that asks if it's okay for the seat to touch the seat back in front. And it says it is okay. It's just not okay for the rear facing only. It doesn't apply to their convertibles and all-in ones, which can touch, or in a center position where it's okay for those two edges to touch. And then in a third row seat where there's not that same concern about deforming. So that's what we've mostly been hearing from. And I think that may have morphed a little bit and like, well, you know, probably it's better not to touch. And then about 10 years ago, amazingly now, Consumer Reports developed its own crash test rig or apparatus that is a little different than the ones that are used for testing to NHTSA standards. It includes that, especially what you can see here is there's a simulated front seat back that is included in it. It also has a floor for testing load legs. So in those testing, in that testing that they've done, Consumer Reports, after a few years of using that test buck, determined that this recommended car seat use for children under age 12. And, you know, we've seen lots of diagrams that look like this, and those stages look pretty typical. But what's notable here is they determined that as of age 1, after that point, they're really better off in a convertible seat rear facing. And so their concern is different than what Evenflow had said. Their concern is that for a frontal crash, they would see for the 1-year-old over 1 in a rear facing only seat, you might see head strikes. So they're going to credit the longer length of that convertible seat as giving more space, which kind of makes sense, right? You need more space for a convertible seat. And so their advice is that parents move on to a convertible car seat by the time a child is age 1. And we know that many kids over age 1 will still fit in the rear facing only seat. So this is advice from Consumer Reports. So that's been something else that's been added to kind of that information that's out there. And it really hasn't been in our curriculum that says one way or another. We're following various manufacturers' advice. And about 1.5 years ago, we got an additional piece of information that is different than what we've been hearing all along. In fact, Dorel is now saying that their rear facing seats, whether they're rear facing only or convertible, must touch the vehicle seat ahead, must touch. So we're not leaving a gap, we're actually touching. And that comes from testing that Dorel sponsored that tested 34 scenarios and found that it was better for the seat back and the car seat to start out touching, so that in a frontal crash, you're going to have them moving in tandem together rather than having a gap where in a frontal crash, there might be a moment where the seat and the child's head takes a severe force from that slamming into the seat back. So they've changed their information in manuals to include these seat backs to show that that's how they're going to want the car seat to align with the seat back. That has been a rolling change in manuals. It started in December 2023. I've seen manuals since then that still don't have it in there, but that actually doesn't matter, because this was announced at Kids in Motion. It has since been announced subsequently to say that new advice is retroactive to all unexpired car seats in use. So whether it says it in the manual or not, Dorel would like all of their brands car seats to actually start off gently touching the seat back. So first of all, we have to understand what are Dorel brands, right? So those are Costco, Safety First, and Maxi Cozy. So any of those brands, rear facing or rear facing only or convertible seats. So it's any rear facing seat. So it's not just like Evenflow was just for the rear facing only. This is for any all-in-one convertible or rear facing only. And it's also going to be on the passenger or driver side. So these are outboard, is another way to put that, outboard position. So again, like even flow, it's not about the middle. It's on those outboard positions where there could be actual touching of the seat ahead. And it applies to any row that the seat would be in. So it would also apply in the third row when touching the second row seat, because that whole dynamic of moving with the seat would be the same in those frontal crashes. And there is in their instructions that have been updated this additional, or be as close as possible, recognizing that it may not be possible every time to have the seat touch, but get it as close as you possibly can. So if you can get it to touch, fine. If you can't, as close as possible. In their convertible manuals, I found that it says that the car seat base must be flat on the vehicle seat, so it should not cause the seat to be lifted off the cushion. I think that would be true of the rear facing only. There's just less chance of that to happen with those. But basically, this concept here in my drawing is that by touching here, it shouldn't lift it off of the seat cushion. So you need to position the seating and everything so that you don't have that lifting. So you'll want to look for still making contact with the seat cushion. Okay, so, this is really quite different, and we need to understand, what does touching actually mean? And you need to assume, even though in those instructions, you notice it didn't say light touching or gentle touching, but Dorel representatives have assured me what they mean is gentle or light touch. It doesn't push hard. It doesn't change the child's angle. And of course, it doesn't lift it off the cushion. So we have this thing out there, this concept called the sheet of paper test, or the paper test. The paper test is where if you were to put a piece of paper, or imagine you can do it in real life, or you can imagine you have it there. But there's this point where you're actually touching the seat back, where that would be held in place, but you could still pull it out without ripping the paper. And that would be that perfect position where it's meeting this touching with gentle touching, but not pushing really hard. So what we want to avoid is saying that we're wedging it in place or bracing or pressing. We're not using pressure. We're not wedging, because that would push into it. The idea isn't that this is what's installing the car seat. It's that when a crash occurs, they are moving in tandem and staying together rather than banging into each other. Doesn't require any pushing or pressing. So just as a summary then, now we have Dorel, all of the brands of Dorel saying you must touch. We have Evenflow still saying you must not touch. Remember, Dorel was from concerns about a frontal crash. Evenflow is saying in a rear impact, they're concerned with their rear facing only, so they must not touch with those. And then what about all the others? Okay, well, pretty much all the others say you may touch if necessary. And this is a moment where I would like to apologize to, if you are listening, the person who was in the front row to my left at Kids in Motion, where I did this presentation, pointed out that the PIPA instructions, or the NUNA instructions, actually say that the car seat should not contact the vehicle interior. And so that's not just the front seat, but the interior all around. And so I want to acknowledge that person. You're right about that. But customer service says that paper test is okay to use. So if you get a car seat in, and it even a NUNA seat, and it will pass the paper test, that's that kind of in between space where you're just right, where you're not causing any problems by touching, but you're also not too far away. But with NUNA, they would say, if you can leave more space, then do so. Same with Baby Arc. Baby Arc specifies in their manuals, they want a 3-inch gap. They say they require it. But if you check the FAQ with Baby Arc, they now do say that you can allow that light touching, which we can describe using the paper test. So pretty much any of these, though some may prefer more space, would allow some touching if necessary. Because let's face it, I mean, most of the time we're actually having a hard time getting the seat to fit, rather than having too much gap. So let's play a little game as we review. May touch, must touch, or must not touch. And so this car seat, this little sister in the foreground, is in her rear facing safety first convertible or all-in-one seat. And so clearly, because that's a safety first, which is a Durrell, and they say must, and it doesn't matter when it was made because it's retroactive. So that one must be touching, and it looks like they probably are. So now we have a baby jogger on the left and a safety first on the right. And so James, with baby jogger, it would say, what would we be allowed to do here with this baby jogger on the left? Well, if we can leave a little space, that's fine. If it must touch, then passing the paper test, it would be okay on the baby jogger. On that safety first seat on the right, again, safety first. So it's a Durrell and it needs to touch. But I want to draw attention to the fact that this image, it's just from the NHTSA image library. What would be touching here? It would actually be the handle, right? And so actually, Durrell brands have all changed so that the handle must be upright and locked when installed in the vehicle. And so in this case, that handle should actually be up. And that is true. Always check instructions. But I did recently find out from them that all the seats that were prior to those instructions have expired now with the handle. So the handle should be up. Again, check, things can change, but even if the instructions allow the handle to be down, it's not the handle that should be the thing that's touching, it's the car seat. So here we have the Nuna PIPA. And the question again is it okay for this one, may touch, must not touch? It's okay if it touches, but we prefer not if the paper test can be passed. And then back around to this same car seat, that safety first, may touch, or must not touch. In this case, we already said it must touch, but I wanted to point out here that the model is a child who is much older, and that means much heavier and putting more weight on it. So it gives the point that when we're doing our installation, sometimes the child isn't in the seat. We want to think about who is this child and how much pressure are they going to put once that bigger kid is put in? Are they going to push hard into the seat ahead? So we want to be thinking about that as well. Because what else do we have to keep in mind? The vehicle instructions, right? We have some issues because we've got all this information from the car seat manufacturer about wanting and must touch and all this, but we also have to keep in mind what the vehicle manufacturers say. And some vehicle owners manual specify that you should not touch. And here's just one example. So you need to know what it says in the vehicle manual. And a lot of times the reason they would say don't touch has to do with how that contact on the back of the seat could affect their airbag activation sensors. And so whether it would make whether it would incorrectly tell the sensor to turn off the airbag or incorrectly tell the sensor that the airbag should be used when it shouldn't, I don't know, but you don't want those sensors to be disrupted. And the reason I have a picture from the latch manual here, and this is from the 2023, but it would be similar in 2025 coming soon, is that has been and will be a bullet at the beginning of each of the manufacturers that asks about their advanced airbag suppression system. And we ask them to say, can it be affected by pressure and force? It's not always the case. Sometimes it's not. We also ask if it's pressing on the back or the underside or both. And so in some cases, it's only the back and not the underside, or vice versa, or both. And then also if it's the front seats, both of them, or if it's just the driver or the passenger side. So keeping all those things in mind. So this can help you. Reading your owner's manual and then checking this also can be helpful to understand whether that touching is a big problem. The other thing that comes to mind, of course, whether you have any information in the manual or not, in the vehicle manual about touching or not, when we adjust the seating, then we're going to change how the other passengers in the car are affected. So one of the things to consider, of course, is if you're in a car that has a back second row seat that slides, if you need to make an adjustment to move a seat forward, consider doing it using the seat that the car seat is actually on. That way you don't change how the front seat is. But this isn't actually a Durrell specific issue. Anytime that we've moved the front seat as CPSTs, we're at a car seat check. Sometimes we move the front seat just to get access, and then when it's all done, we got to remember, oh, now who sits in this seat? And we got to get that seat back to where it goes. And does this still work? And does the belt system still work on that person that sits in front? Because, a lot of times, well, always we want the belt system to fit properly. If you've slid them back and now the shoulder belt doesn't fit on their shoulder like it should be making contact, right? So we have to balance that too. But I put this Hudson Center for Prenatal Vehicle Safety slide in a picture in the slide because that's a resource I really appreciate for resources on how a seatbelt should fit a person while pregnant, because that's who we see a lot of the time, right? And if we're working behind that front passenger seat or driver's seat, and we've just moved the seat out of a position, whether it's for a Durrell seat or anything else, it really needs to be one of our final steps to ensure that the belt fits properly on that front seat occupant. And just another consideration is technology in the vehicle. And in particular, are these easy entry and exit features in our cars. And what those are, if you haven't experienced them yet, is many cars, when you turn off the engine and you're going to get out as a driver, they're going to move the seat back to help you get out easily. Well, I just set up my car seat so it perfectly touches with the paper test and everything. And now you're going to roll the seat back automatically. And that isn't something we want to have happen, because that could press into the seat. It could move it out of position or change the angle and disrupt the child or disrupt the installation. So usually these can be turned off. Some setting in the infotainment system or some such that you can do, but you'll want to take that into account. And I personally have just recently started to experience this because we got a new car, but it's not a fancy one. It's a CRV. It's like whatever people, the basic, the most popular one in the NDCF is the CRV. And it turns out the baseline CRV will do this moving thing if you don't reset it. So just be keeping that in mind as well. All right, so moving along to our next topic, it's load legs. And I have a asterisk there, and it should be a big fat asterisk because I want to make sure I mention that load legs, of course, aren't just for rear facing seats, right? So I can be, for convenience, put it in here because we do usually see them for rear facing, but we do have a couple seats on the market that load leg is used forward facing. So I just want to make it clear, anything I'm saying about them now actually applies to those forward facers as well. So load leg, I think by now I've been presenting about load legs for a while for different reasons. And we've definitely gone from people not necessarily knowing what they are, but by now many people know. It doesn't matter what it's really called. We've got a lot of brands. I may have even missed one or two here that that have car seat models, some multiple car seat models that have a load leg. So this is a pretty basic thing. You can see it circled on that collect ling as that part that goes from the back of the seat, or if it's forward facing the front, down to the floor. And so thinking about the seats, we've had a few for a long time, especially this Nuna Pippa has been around. We've used it for a long time, but now we have so many more, and there are some little nuances in the instructions. So in other words, if you know one load leg instruction, you don't necessarily know them all. So I want to point out a few things to be looking at. One is the floor contact indicator and where that is. Want to look for that. Also, whether that leg, when it's firm on the ground, I'm always kind of checking right here to make sure that it's not so stiff that it's causing this hinge to actually allow the seat to prop up at the end. In most cases, you should always have contact here still, definitely with this particular seat, but there actually are some that would allow a little bit of raising. So again, just depends on the instructions and what they say. There's also the angle of the leg itself. This Pippa, we're pretty used to maybe, just releasing it, it drops straight down and it kind of goes straight to the ground like it's shown in the picture. But others do want it to come more at outward position here. And so you'll be checking for an angle leg indicator. Some of them do give you some sort of red to green or other kind of indication, and checking the instructions. I don't know of any that want it to come inward at all. So, watch out for that. I usually let caregivers know when they have the leg that you don't want to shove the diaper bag in there that could push the leg inward. That's not where you want it to be. And typically those will move if you shove things, and they're looking for places to put all their stuff. So, give them a heads up about that. And then there's the floor covering policy. And so many brands are like, whatever is on the floor, as long as the contact is being made, it's okay. But others do require that the floor covering be removed. And one in particular that I know for sure is Up a Baby has said no to floor coverings. So that is going to be this WeatherTech kind of add-on type stuff. It could be a kind of plastic thing that is an add-on package from the manufacturer of the car, or not an aftermarket. Either way, that would need to come out. But also the factory provided carpeting that we're kind of used to, that would need to be lifted up as well. So make sure you're familiar with the usage requirements of the car seat manufacturer. And again, we're not doing this in a void. We're in a particular car. And so we do have to ask, what about the vehicle manufacturer? What do they say? And so here we're saying, we want to check the owner's manual, but we also want to check other resources. So the latch manual is a very good resource for this because it's a new technology. When most of these manuals were written, we didn't even have load legs, or they really weren't on anybody's radar. And even today, when they are pretty common, they're not something that most of the vehicle manuals are going to go into, but they will talk to us about it. And the way they talk to us in the for the latch manual, by the way, is we ask them at the beginning of a update cycle, which would be the spring before the manual comes out, to give us information about a lot of topics. And on this topic, we just say, look, if you have any concerns about load legs in your vehicle or things you want to tell CPSTs, just let us know. And so some people have. We've had over 30 have put in for over 30 models, that is not brands. For over 30 models, we have some instructions in certain years or in certain situations where use of the load leg isn't allowed. But at the same time, we have over a dozen that actually have now specified for the upcoming latch manual that you may use the load leg in their vehicle. So, and then we have a couple, Ram is one of them, where they actually say in the bullet section, because it applies to all their vehicles, that they don't want you to use the load leg except for the ProMaster van, but the pickup trucks for Ram. And the issue there is that they have storage space under the floor. And so what their concern is that, you don't want to have a leg going down to a lid. Typically those are supposed to be onto something that's hard. And if it's on that lid, they're concerned that it would break through. These pictures are showing you, this is the bottom side of this carpet here. And so you have to pop it off here and lift it up to even see that there's storage underneath. So it's not clear just looking in the truck. You got to check the instructions, and the latch manual is going to help with that. So to recap this, some seating positions, instructions say no to load legs. And sometimes, but not always, that's because of underfloor storage. So it's not, it's not a underfloor storage means don't use it, or that's the only reason, but that is sometimes the reason. We like to know why. And that is sometimes the reason. And other times there's others, but also storage areas are not always a problem. So don't jump to that conclusion. In fact, that's the main reason, or one reason why some manufacturers have told the latch manual to go ahead and tell people it's okay, is that they don't want you to misunderstand if there is storage that you can't use it. In fact, you can. So good thing to check. Generally speaking, check instructions and follow them. And if you're not sure about it, certainly ask the manufacturer. You can contact Safe Ride News as well to see if we have any information, but contact the manufacturer. And besides instructions that say don't do it, of course, there are times when we just can't. And I think most of people listening would know this, right? There are many vehicles where we can't use the leg in the center The manufacturers of the car seats have made those legs so much better now where you can really make them much shorter, but there's going to be some of those center humps that are just too high to make it work. And so if that's going to put the leg there, if it's going to lift the seat up, that's a no. Okay. And this other picture here to the right, that it's hard to see it because it's black, but that center seat has a cup holder in front of the seat. And of course, you wouldn't want to put, if that's where it's going to drop, that's not going to work. So there's things that get in the way, especially in the center. So just be aware, sometimes there's just incompatibility. Okay. So moving on to talking about forward facing, I want to talk a little about tethering because we all love tethering so much, right? And then energy management that's tied to rigid latch. So starting right off, of course, it's about head excursion, right? For those forward facers, tethering is so beneficial because it's going to prevent the head potentially hitting something inside the vehicle. But there's a couple things about pickup truck tethering, one of our absolute favorites, right? It's already challenging enough, but there's a couple things about that I wanted to talk about that are kind of new and or newly recognized. So when it comes to router systems, that one where you go behind the seat through the loop or some kind of router and then to the side to go to another loop or some other anchor to hook the tether, there has been some changes based on how to route it vis-a-vis the head restraint. And so what I'm trying to show here, and this is a tether strap. Katrina is so clever. She went to a dealership and she taped each of the tethers so she could do some comparisons. And so that's why it has this zigzaggy on it. But that's the tether strap. And as you can see, it's going through the head restraint post, which we typically do, and then through the loop, and then over to a tether anchor. At issue here, though, is you can kind of tell this loop, the router, is not being strained. And as we tighten this up, because of the size of that router, it's actually not going to get strained. It's what's going to happen in a crash is it's actually going to hang up on this post. And this is in a Ford F-150, or actually it might be a 350. But the instructions for all those models from the past would say to route the tether strap under the head restraint and through the loop directly behind the child seat, which it's showing in a picture here. Head restraints aren't really shown, but they're saying put it through the head restraint first. Okay. Some point, not that they announced it to us, but at some point they recognized the fact that this was turning that post into essentially the router. It was putting the force on the head restraint post, and they don't want that. So in 2019, 2020, it kind of rolling changes into their manuals for Ford. They changed it so that you're to bring those loops forward and then route the child restraint tether strap through the loop forward of the head restraint. So you'd have it up here and you wouldn't go through the post. You'd go through here and then you'd kind of bring your strap over behind and you'd hook it to this one pulled behind, so that in a crash, it's going to actually strain the loop and put that force on the loop. So over here on the instructions from the manual, I just want to make it clear. It says are familiar between the head restraint posts. You're like, okay, I know that. I'm going to put it through those posts. No, it's saying to route the vehicle tether loop. You're bringing that router forward, and then you're bringing the tether strap through it. And then it kind of added in that time frame, they've added, and it still exists today in the instructions, about this sentence having to do with the head restraint post is strong enough to be a head restraint, but it is not strong enough to hold the child restraint during a crash. So they're trying to avoid that. And so here's just an example from the latch gallery, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. Basically, pre-model year 15, the instructions say, and they allow that you go through the posts. So they change where Ford changed the instructions is since model year 15. Since model year 15, it would look like this with the loop out here for the router and going behind to attach behind that head restraint. So here you can see it's doing that regular thing going through, and the way they want you to do it since model year 15, right? So as I said, though, they changed the manual starting in around 2019, but they want us to follow these instructions starting model year 15. And so, you can see this in the latch gallery, which is at our website, saferidenews.com. And you can see up here under latch, you can find latch gallery, click on these tether anchors, and you can see Katrina made these various pre-2015 and post-2015 examples. And then there's examples for when there are multiple car seats tethered in the same car, which really makes it a little bit more challenging. And this is a page from that Ford F-150 in the latch manual that is describing down here, because if we want to have these instructions since 2015, but they're not in the manual, we need to clarify the manual here to say, it may not say this in the manual, it may still say to go through the posts, but we don't want you to starting in model year 2015. So this is something important to see as your written information from Ford in the latch manual to change how you would tether from what it says in the owner's manual. And then up here, it's telling you that there are the 3 tether anchors, and see a bullet headed tethering in certain Ford pickup trucks at the beginning of the entry. So that's mentioned a few different times. You can see it's here too, and it's here too. And what that's saying is, I can't print all of this for every single one of this book, would get too big. It's saying, go back to the bullets and read this section, okay? And so in this section, it's going to tell you about those model year 15 and newer, model year 14 and older. And I will show you, this is from the 2025 latch manual. We kind of reorganized that a little to hopefully make it even easier to read it. So it's telling you how to position the routing loop and then how to complete tethering. And then there's some nuances for each of the year periods as to if you have to go past that seatbelt, how they want you to go past the seatbelt. So hopefully that is something that you will refer to whenever you're helping people tether in those Ford pickups. One last thing to note, though, is in that same bullet section, and the bullet sections for a lot of the a lot of the brands, there's going to be a head restraints section, and it's going to let you know if you can take the head restraints off. If I can just take those head restraints off, that might be a lot easier to do that routing rather than worrying about getting around those head restraints. So that is another option. But of course, if you do that, then what do you do with that head restraint? You got to make sure that it's somewhere that is secured, it won't become a projectile, that the caregiver knows where it is and they can get it if they're ever using it for an adult in the car. So it's not somewhere where they can't access it. So that can be a challenge, but this is an option if it becomes complicated. Now shifting over, other manufacturers have also noticed this issue, and they've handled it in a different way. So while Ford has changed their instructions on how to do the router, Chevrolet and GMC for their trucks in around that 2019 timeframe redesigned their tethering system so that it looks more like this. Now, it used to be that they were the ones with that oval shaped rubber coated loop, right? You're kind of familiar with that. Those were the Chevys and GMs. But no more. You maybe haven't seen them as much anymore, right? Because they have redesigned it a while back. And what they've done is they have a webbing loop, but it's out here. It's not in the middle of the head restraint posts. And so that when it is strained from tightening or in a crash, the end of it, the place where it's going to pull against it is right behind the car seat. In other words, between the 2 head restraints. So it looks a little like this. So we're used to seeing that routing loop right between the posts or right behind, but now you'll see it to the outboard of it. And if I flip that over behind the head restraint and try to go straight through it, there's not enough loop opening to get through. So what you need to do is go through the middle and then kind of turn the opposite direction of where you want to go through that loop. And then now that I've got it through there, then I can go back to tightening it up and attaching it over here. So this is what it ends up looking like in the end. Simply by moving the anchor point for their router loop over to the side, now I go straight through the middle and take a sharp right. And you can see this has been tightened as it's been attached. And all the straining would go here. It's not going to go on that head restraint post. So these are like I said, Chevy and GMC. We have some of our Fiat Chrysler automobiles, trucks have also been adjusted in this way. And just to show you also, the thing that it attaches to, the actual tether anchor, is no longer a loose loop or anything. It's this really solid metal piece. This is the one behind the center. So you have both outboards go to this hole. And I really like that, because I feel like then you have fewer chances of leaving it loose. You know, you got a really solid starting point and you're going to tighten it up all the way through. For the latch manual, well, let's see, I'm going to go back here actually. You'll notice that the instructions will start with saying to remove the head restraints. And so the head restraints are pictured here, but the rest of them are kind of talking about having removed the head restraints. And that does kind of make it easier for doing these. So that's stated in the manual. But it doesn't tell you what to do with the head restraints once they're off. And so for the latch manual that's coming up, we will actually say from GM that you can, once you get it all done, you can just set the head restraint back in, because you can see it's not going to interfere with how that's functioning. Okay, finishing up the topic of pickup trucks, I just want to also touch on direct routing. There's not a lot changed on that, but there are some things that I really want to emphasize. When a direct routing system typically is going to mean you're going to fold the seat back forward. You can kind of make it out that the car seat is moved forward, the front seat is back, is tipping, and you can see where your tether anchors are. There are a few new Toyotas, a couple new Toyota pickups that actually put it on the seat back. So that's actually kind of nice. But most are going to be on the back wall that are direct. So when you do that, a couple things to make sure you're careful about. One is be certain that the seat back relocks. That has been a concern of mine lately, because I've really noticed that it takes a lot of effort in some cases, especially in this Maverick here that I'm talking about, because the full seat back folds forward and there's only one locking point. So you really want to make sure that lock point has joined, the little tooth has fit in, and you can't pull the seat back out. You could easily get this car seat installed and pushed in tightly without having that seat back be tight. Seems amazing, but I've tested it out for actually a couple years now, and it would be bad to have that seat installed that way. The other thing to point out is, how do you get this car seat uninstalled? This has been true forever, but it's something that's come up for me recently to recognize, because we've just struggled to get it installed, and we say bye-bye. And I think that we want to make sure, when we're especially doing this sort of installation, that we address the concept of getting it back out. Because once I've tightened it up, because the adjuster is way down the lower part of the seat, I can't get back there because I've just tightened the tether. And if I try to pull the seat back forward, it won't go forward. Even though I maybe uninstalled the car seat, it won't go forward because the seat is, the tether is tight. So you want to let the caregiver know, so that they don't resort to cutting the tether strap, that they need to first uninstall the car seat, of course, undo the latch straps or the seatbelt, okay, so that it's loose. Adjust it if you've made the harness really high, make it as small as you can. Take the head restraints off if you can, so that there's not much in your way. And then you're just going to have to lift that car seat up high so that you can get the seat forward and you can loosen the strap. So sounds to me like a job for two people, right? Somebody's got to hold it, somebody's got to loosen the tether. But I think that that's something that we as technicians can think through, and I wouldn't count on a caregiver to necessarily do that. They might resort to cutting, and we of course wouldn't want that. There are a couple things we can do to plan ahead on something like this. If you have a pickup truck like this, again, the issue is because our adjuster is way down low. As you can see here, the adjusters are low. With a V-shaped tether, the adjuster is up here in the designs we have on the market anyway. And so that would be somewhere where we could actually loosen it and then get the seat forward. So a V-shaped tether might be a good idea if there's any planning on that. And if you have a seat like this, another option would be if the car seat manufacturer has a tether extender, this would be another handy use. Someday I'll do a presentation all about tether extenders because there's all sorts of cool things you can do with them. But that's another thing that we're a tether extender, because that's going to give you a second adjuster up high close to the seat back. Okay. Oh, there we go. Circling. Okay. All right. Wrapping up talking about the forward facing, I wanted to address a topic that has been kind of popular lately, if not common, but is the topic of using a seatbelt at the same time as latch, right? And this has been coming up because we have at least a couple seats on the market, and we may have more in the future, that uses special energy management systems. This one is the FOOMF by Kleck, which isn't new. We've had it a long time. And it is something that that this is showing here in a crash. This material here is their React technology. It's going to crumple down and help absorb the crash force. So that's that yellow part is representing this, that's going to crumple down and absorb the crash force. And this all works based on the attachment to the vehicle using their rigid latch system. Okay. And in fact, if you look at the website for FOOMF, it's going to tell you about how much improvement in both head injury criteria and chest acceleration you're going to get with all ages using their car seat. And if it's a 6-year-old, you're seeing improvement. But the footnote does say that it's installed using both latch and the vehicle seatbelt, which we typically think of as a no-no. But I think we all know when it's allowed by both sides, it can be okay. So we now have another car seat on the market. And in fact, Baby Arc, I think, is by next year at least, we'll have 3 models of the Baby Arc series of seats, but they're all going to have a car seat with this. This is a base, and it looks really long, but this part actually goes up the seat back. And it again has rigid latch, and it has also has an energy management system tied to the rigid latch, but it's not the same at all. It's a very different technology, and you can see it over here. It's this coil that's going to stretch out, and that helps with that riding, allowing the body to slow down gradually, but in a controlled fashion. And you can actually see it on the base here because these are the coils, and they left little windows so you could see if they've been used from in the forces of a crash. So it's a very highly engineered. You can really see the innards of it here, and all the white stuff around is just for smoothness and looks. But this is that really very highly engineered protective car seat shell that they want you to get all the benefits from using the latch system. And so, of course, when you see that seat, you can kind of guess it's heavy. It's pretty big. And we know that a combined weight of the child in the car seat is what limits us in how long we can use the latch system at all, whether it's rigid or not, because we have that as part of our regulation. So for the FOOMF, they're only going to allow use of the latch system forward facing to 35 pounds. And for Baby Arc, it's 15 pounds. So you can't even use just the lower anchor attachments based on lower anchor attachment limits when they're forward facing, because the limit is 15 pounds. So what both of those brands would say is use both. Keep using those rigid latch so you can keep getting the benefits of this energy management technology, but add the seatbelt. And their instructions will describe a little how to do that. Baby Arc has a vehicle compatibility tool on its website, which is kind of cool. If you go to support, you can see under car list compatibility and enter your car. So here we have a Hyundai Kona, and then the final result is, yes, we've tried it in that car, it fits, which is really cool. Then if you change it up and I say, oh, how about my Hyundai Veloster? It's going to go over here and say, no, we've tried it. It doesn't really fit in that car. But that's Baby Arc saying it fits or not. What other concerns do we have, right? Again, is the vehicle maker okay with doing both latch and a seatbelt? Well, that's not typically what we do, and it is not what is required by regulations for them to test out. Now, some brands like Ford, Lincoln, Mercury from before has always had a nice table like this. And if you check, they actually have using both as an allowed method for those bigger kids. So that is stated right in the manuals, and it has been for years and years. So while we do think of this as a no-no, don't forget there are some brands that do allow it. For the latch manual, I don't ask every brand to tell us if it's allowed or not, because some of them, they just haven't even tested it out. So if I ask them, they're just going to say no because they can't say yes to something they haven't tested. So where you want to look in the latch manual is in chapter 3. This page is from the 2023, but I worked really hard so that people who've learned where to find things, even though the text has changed, the information will be in roughly the same place. So it's still going to be chapter 3, page 24. And what it says there, we have had Ford and Lincoln, Mercedes and Porsche. They all do allow using both together. But there are other brands that say that you can't use both together. And so that's going to be stated in the latch manual too if they don't allow it. And so, for instance, we have the Fiat Chrysler automobiles. In many of their manuals, it even says it. And you can see in this 2020 Grand Cherokee, they have a nice table that makes things pretty clear with questions that we typically might ask. And it's saying clearly, no, you can't use both. In pretty much all the other brands, most of the time, it's just not even addressed. And so the question is, if you do get to a situation where you've got this technology, and it might be in these two that we have available right now, and it might be in ones coming down the line because, you know, they're impressive innovation going on, lots of new energy management features. We want to get the most out of those features. And so if the manual doesn't say anything about not using both, but the instructions for that manufacturer's car seat say to do so, and give you some advice on how to use both and when you shouldn't, then it's probably okay to go ahead and do that. But of course, you can check with the manufacturer of the car to see if that's okay. But when they put those instructions in the manual, like what I just showed with Fiat Chrysler with the Jeep as an example, maybe they hadn't even considered some of these special techniques for getting good energy management. And so I would still say it's really valuable to follow up with the manufacturer or have the caregiver follow up with the maker of their brand to just see if there's any leeway for a car seat that's made specifically for that purpose. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk a little bit about boosters. And like always, it seems like I have very little time to talk about boosters. And I feel like that's not fair to boosters because they are so awesome. But it, you know, fortunately, they're also super simple and we can talk about them pretty quickly. And as we all know, they do these 3 awesome things. They place the body so the shoulder belt fits, the lap belt fits, and the body can actually sit properly in that position comfortably for the entire ride. And it's important that they have that good fit around the lower body because as we get older, we have these wonderful hardened protuberances of our pelvis called the iliac spines. But when we're younger, when we're born, we don't have those. And as the body grows and develops, those grow in like cartilage. They're not going to brace a belt until a child is through puberty. So that's why we have this advice to keep the belt down low on the lap and not let it ride up because that can cause seatbelt syndrome, which is the bursting of internal organs, or even in a bad enough crash, it can go through and hurt the spine. So wonderful that we have booster seats, and belt fit is so important that it not ride up like that. And so we can thank the IHS for many years using this Jasper ATD. Doesn't need any arms or even much of a leg. We just need to know how that booster seat is going to make the belt fit. And when they first started testing these, a lot of them didn't fit well. And now we have boosters that really do a great job of fitting the seatbelt. So what's new then about this? Well, fitting the seatbelt is very important, but there's other things that are important too. And one of them is to remember about how elevating the child using a booster seat does some important things for us. So really, by boosting the child, we actually bring their head up into the window area, which isn't intuitive. Like I might think, oh, I want to keep my child way down, but that puts them next to this hard metal. Instead, you want to bring them up by that tempered glass. And in fact, to get the benefit of an airbag. So we often are scared of airbags, right? But when we're talking side curtain airbag, we don't want the child leaning, but we want them to get the benefit of that side curtain airbag. This is the booster's side impact protection more than anything else, is putting the child in a position where they are like an adult, and can take advantage of those systems because of putting their body in that position. And that side bag will actually help them. And that's good to know as we're moving into next June, when the compliance deadline for FMVSS 213A for side impacts goes into effect. Great to know that we will continue that booster seats, even though the child is larger than to meet that standard, we have ways to use a booster to put that child in position to start benefiting from the systems in the rear. So a lot of attention also on prevention of submarine. And again, the elevated seating surface can help with that. It helps with their placement of the belt. I'm sorry, the height of the child. Also, some attention is being given right now to the placement of the seatbelt. Usually we put the shoulder belt under the armrest, but in some cases, depending on things like how long this part is, they may turn out, the manufacturer may say, put it over. So be checking your manuals, because you might see some times where you actually go over the armrest and not under. So all of these things will be continuing to evolve when it comes to booster seats to help them be more protective. But just as a final word on this, we do know that it's most important that we keep working on ending premature transition to boosters, because of course it doesn't matter how well this booster shoulder belt is going to fit on her, the lap portion, whether she's sitting in a comfortable position. She's not old enough to be in a booster. She should still be in her 5-point harness. So that it continues to be our work as CPSTs. And we want to be alerting the caregivers not just to maximums, but minimums. And that's going to mean both the weight limit, which is we're going into next year, going to be mandating they start no smaller than 40 pounds. That is pretty much settled. Most of them have already adjusted, with rare exceptions. But also the height and the age, because the manufacturers are, even if they, if it's 40 pounds, there might be a height that also really matters, as well as an age you have to keep in mind as well, so that we can use our instructions to help back us up on when a child is ready to go into a booster. So that ends my presentation. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm ending with a reveal. Happy to note that the upcoming latch manual is Navy. So I hope everyone will remember to utilize Navy in the coming couple years. Katrina and I worked really hard to get as much new information in there. Of course, we have all the new vehicles. We have Rivian in there now. And we also, just worked on a lot of different ways to make the information clearer as much as we could, and adding new information where we can. So I'm close to out of time, but I'm happy to stay as long as necessary for questions. So James or Kendra, are there any questions?
Awesome, Denise. Thank you as always. Just cracking open the question box here. First one, what about airbags being activated when the car seat touches the seat back of the car? Was this addressed?
What about airbags being activated when the car seat touches the back? Okay, so just want to make sure I'm clear. I think that's asking about a second row seat pressing into the front seat and activating the airbag. Meaning not deploying the airbag, but telling the sensor that it should be on, right? I think, is that how you would understand that question?
That's how I'm taking it. Yep.
So exactly, that's one thing we really have to watch for. Now, it shouldn't be an issue if we follow that the sheet of paper test. That paper test is kind of this liminal place where it's kind of touching, but it's, it's not pushing and it's not really pressing, and it shouldn't cause a problem. But I'm glad that the question was asked, because I should point out our dashboard is going to give an indicator about our airbag status. And so a driver should be reminded, especially if they have a car seat that's pressing, especially if the child has gotten bigger, right? And might put more pressure as, we see them today, their child gains weight over time. They need to know that they're looking at their airbag indicator on the dash, and if it says it's on when it should be off, then that's an issue. If it says it's off when it should be on, that's an issue. And so, or if it's changing, vacillating on during the drive, then something's a little bit off, and we don't want that to be happening.
Awesome. Next one, for this light touch concept, is that a light touch with no child in the child restraint? I imagine that adding the child to the child restraint might apply a bit more pressure or touch to the seat in front.
Yeah, again, thank you for re-emphasizing this. It's definitely true. We would want to be thinking about with the child in. A lot of times at my checkup events, we're helping an expectant parent. I know their baby, whether the baby is 5 pounds or 10 pounds, that baby's not going to put a lot of pressure on it, but they're going to grow. And over time, they might, it becomes a bigger deal with their convertible seat, especially when you consider, if you think about it, and the ones I've seen so far. So at my car seat checks, it's nice these days since the pandemic, I know which car seats are coming most of the time. So I'm going to screen them ahead of time. It used to be whatever we got, but it's nice to kind of have a heads up what's coming. And then I'm watching for those Durrell seats. And so, we're making sure that we go through our checklist of things that you need to look for, and adjusting the front seat, etc. So what I've seen is, of course, with those lower down rear facing only ones, that's not going to, the child's weight is not pressing the back of it into it so much, because it's really the top of it that's really just kind of touching. Whereas those convertible seats really might, they have a lot more back to them, and you might have you will have a bigger child, and that's where you really want to watch out for that. So if you're helping a family that came without their child, and they're just getting the car seat installed, that's something you want to push some weight down in the seat and see how it is.
Awesome. We do have a few more questions, but I'll lob a couple of softballs at you in the meantime, Denise.
Okay.
One is, when will the new latch manuals be available, and how can we get a new latch manual?
Okay, well, that's an easy one. Yeah. The latch manual comes out at the first of the year. So we know that's a holiday, the first day. But as soon as we can get it after, then we will start shipping them out. And you can order at saferidenews.com under publications. And that's going to have information for how to get it in the US. And if you're from Canada, you can check under in Canada.
Perfect. Next one, is the paper test a procedure or term approved by the National Child Passenger Safety Board to be taught to new CPSTs in the 2024 curriculum?
That's a question I should know the answer to. I don't remember if that, and maybe Kendra remembers, or if Tammy's anywhere nearby, she can say. But the paper test is definitely one of those things that's it's not. The first time I heard it was probably over 15 years ago from an engineer at Honda to explain what would be okay with them at Honda. And it was really made clear. This is just something, it's an example. I don't know, somebody made it up. I don't know how long it's been around, but that's when I first heard about it. And, but then more recently, we're talking with Durrell, talking with other manufacturers. It sounds like it's something that the manufacturers do know about and can accept as something they respect that as a guideline. Kendra, have you had a chance to?
Yeah, it's not in the curriculum as a standard test, just because if it can touch, it can touch. If it can't touch, it can't touch, no matter how. There's too many variants between the manufacturers and a vehicle manufacturer, so it's not in there.
So, you know, and yeah, it's kind of specific right now to certain instructions. And those instructions don't talk about it, you know, so this is definitely a CPST kind of, this is how we can help you kind of thing. But interesting, since the study that came out, the study that went into their decision to make this actually came out just a little while ago. And so now we actually can see what was in the study. And the study actually included a test that would brace the seat where, you know, we said wedging or bracing is not allowed. And in their testing, they found that in a test lab scenario, bracing where they would squish in about 3/4 of an inch into the seat was actually not a bad thing at all. But it's a bad thing in your car. So fortunately, just barely touching also worked. And that kind of gives us the best of both worlds. Right now, the only official thing we have, well, we don't have an official thing, but I have had manufacturers say that the paper test is going to be something that is allowed. And I'm sure the curriculum committee will consider it for the next go around. And maybe they'll decide they'll use it, or maybe they decide it's not appropriate for that introductory training. But that's why we're having CEU sessions, right? So that we can learn those additional pieces of information.
Great. What are your thoughts on having seatbelt alarms in the back seats for new vehicles in the future when a belt isn't latched? Concerned it will lead to more latch and seatbelt used at the same time.
Well, it's ironic to get this question, which isn't a easy law, but NHTSA just ruled on this, and I have it as a PDF to read later today. We knew what they'd recommended was to have a backseat alarm be a requirement for the seatbelt use. So what the question asker is suggesting is that if I have something that is telling me there's a person sitting in the back, but they're not buckled up, they're going to set off an alarm. Well, what if that is a car seat that's installed using latch and not a seatbelt? That's going to set off false alarms. And I've had that happen, and many of you may have had that too, where you've completed a check and then the parent thankfully came back and said, my alarm's going off. And so there are settings that you can use to fix that, or there are ways to buckle the belt to make that to trick the system. But for the latch manual, this year and actually the time before, and maybe even the time before that, we've been asking the manufacturers about that and asking them for their advice for car seat use, because that's not something they actually talk about in the manuals. And so check in the bullet section, because there's always most of them are going to talk about when they've started, because even though it just got a final rule, many of the brands have already been rolling that in, and they will tell you if there's a chance that a false alarm will go off because a child because a car seat's installed with latch, and give you some advice on what to do in some cases.
Awesome. Just a couple more for you here, Denise. Do you foresee booster manufacturers ever asking torso heights? For example, granddaughter has long legs and short torso.
So I'm trying to think what the question is, because like for limits,
Seated height
for overall, for limits on when to use it is what we were discussing. Yeah. It's a little bit like any other car seat. Like with our rear facing seats, we know what we truly want is the 1 inch above the head. That kind of takes into account the torso height versus the legs, but there is there's a overall height requirement as well. I guess the answer to the question is NHTSA requires them to state certain, height limits, and the manufacturers certainly could give a torso height. It's really hard for, it's hard to expect a family to know what the height of a child is to start with, let alone understand how to measure torso height to the top of the head. So it becomes kind of tricky. Manufacturers can add that, but they do also have to give an overall height because it's a requirement. So James, you could probably answer that question better than me.
I'm not wading into this one today, Denise.
Okay, all right, not today.
Just one more, and then have a number of people asking, is it possible to get a copy of the PowerPoint?
Oh, well, this is recorded and it's going to be posted, and I could probably make a PDF of it. I can't think of any reason why I wouldn't be able to. Everything in there is. So I don't know if Kendra can hand out a PDF, or you can contact me.
Yeah, you can send me the PDF. I'll put the secretariat email in the Q&A box. People can pull that, and if you want it, you're welcome to email me.
Awesome. So just a couple more things before we go. Again, thank you so much, Denise, for a very informative presentation today. Thank you, as always, to Kendra for keeping us on track and keeping me in line, which is anything but an easy thing to do, and she does it very well. So thank you for that. So just a couple of quick announcements. We hope that you are enjoying the National Child Passenger Safety Board webinar series. We're having a lot of fun delivering these, and we've had some really great presentations this year. We hope you will join us in January and February for 2 CEU webinars. Visit cpsboard.org/webinars to register or scan the QR code on your screen. You can skip one more slide if you would. Thank you so much. So the webinar recording will be posted to carseateducation.org within 1 to 2 days. For the child passenger safety technicians and instructors in attendance, the presentation qualifies for 1 CEU. Proof of attendance will be emailed 24 hours after the webinar. You must enter the webinar information into your profile at cert.safekids.org to receive the CEU certification. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again, Denise, for, it's always an informative presentation. We hope everyone has a safe and wonderful day, and thank you for everything you do for keeping child passengers safe and their families as well. Thank you, everybody.